When President Ibrahim Traoré announced that Burkina Faso would release 5 million ducks into the wild, the world was stunned. Many thought it was madness. Why invest in birds when the country faced drought, hunger, and constant dependence on foreign aid? But Traoré wasn't gambling recklessly, he was building a vision. A vision wrapped in feathers and wings. For decades, Burkina Faso's people had endured food shortages and the humiliation of relying on aid shipments of rice and wheat. Traoré knew that true sovereignty meant feeding themselves. And food security required more than imported grain, it demanded creativity. That creativity took the shape of the Duck Project. Why ducks? Because they thrive where cattle and chickens struggle. They feed on insects, weeds, and leftover grain. They resist local diseases, reproduce quickly, and provide not just meat, but eggs, feathers, and even fertilizer. The strategy was simple but bold: turn rivers, ponds, and wetlands into living banks of food and wealth. Special farms were built around Ouagadougou, Bobo Dioulasso, and Kaya. Within months, millions of ducklings were raised. Then came the unforgettable day helicopters and trucks released 5 million ducks into the waterways of the nation. Villagers watched the skies fill with wings. It wasn't just a release of birds, it was a symbol of rebirth. Traoré explained it clearly: we do not want to wait for aid. We will grow our food, hatch our food, and let the land give us prosperity. Ducks are not charity, they are wealth. Critics laughed. Some called it a circus. Others accused him of gambling with hunger. But within a year, the results silenced the doubters. Those 5 million ducks multiplied into tens of millions. Each duck laying up to 200 eggs a year flooded markets with affordable protein. Families could buy eggs, roast duck, and soups at prices they had never seen before. Farmers earned money directly, and new industries grew around feathers, pillows, and clothing. The ecological effects were just as powerful. Ducks devoured locusts and crop-destroying insects, reducing the need for toxic pesticides. Fields near rivers began to flourish again. Instead of spraying chemicals, Burkina Faso unleashed a natural army with wings. And Traoré thought beyond survival. He looked to exports. With global demand for duck products rising, Burkina Faso could position itself as Africa's largest duck producer, tapping into billion-dollar markets in Asia and the Middle East. But perhaps the most brilliant impact was psychological. The humble duck became a national symbol of pride. Children ran to rivers to watch ducklings swim. Families collected eggs. Markets buzzed with new energy. The world took notice, from Paris to Beijing, where photos of villagers smiling with baskets of eggs made headlines. Development experts who once mocked the plan began to study it. Aid agencies that sent sacks of corn now asked how they could support the Duck Project. In less than a year, the story changed. Ibrahim Traoré was no longer seen as just a young idealist. He became the leader who turned a bird into a weapon of sovereignty. And so, the gamble of 5 million ducks became more than an ecological experiment. It became a declaration: Burkina Faso will stand on its own wings. Burkina Faso chose to fight hunger with intelligence, not dependence. When President Ibrahim Traoré released 5 million ducks across the country, it was more than a spectacle. It was the beginning of a carefully designed economic transformation. For years, foreign analysts underestimated him. But Traoré knew that hunger was not just about empty stomachs, it was about broken economic structures that trapped people in dependency. In his vision, ducks were not simply birds. They were the seeds of new markets, new jobs, and new confidence. The results came quickly. Families living near rivers and irrigation canals began collecting eggs, hatching ducklings, and selling them in local markets. Wetlands that had once been abandoned were suddenly alive again, turning into community-owned duck farms. Young people, instead of migrating to crowded cities in search of work, stayed home. They built coops, tended duck populations, and experimented with feed. Within a year, thousands of households reported fresh income streams. A villager in the Sahel could sell eggs in town, while her neighbors sold roasted duck to passing traders. Markets that had once been silent now buzzed with life. A new phrase entered local slang, duck money. This surge of opportunity reduced unemployment, especially among young men, easing the tensions that often fueled unrest. And with food security improving, the nation grew stronger from within. For decades, Burkina Faso had relied on cheap, imported poultry from Europe, frozen, subsidized, and devastating to local farmers. But with the Duck Project, that dependence began to fade. Restaurants in Ouagadougou and Bobo Dioulasso added duck dishes to their menus. Roadside vendors sold affordable duck meat and eggs. The money stayed in the national economy instead of flowing abroad. At the same time, nutrition improved. Protein consumption rose among the poorest families, and malnutrition rates began to drop. Simply by letting ducks multiply and spread, Traoré had unlocked a sustainable food source that strengthened both health and dignity. But his vision didn't stop at home. He had his eyes on global markets. Asia, especially China and Vietnam, was already consuming vast amounts of duck. The Middle East valued feathers and foie gras. Europe had niche luxury markets for organic poultry. By the third year, Burkina Faso had enough surplus to export. Modern slaughterhouses and packaging plants were built with international partners eager to join this unlikely boom. Soon, Burkinabe duck meat, labeled organic and free-range from the Sahel, appeared in markets abroad. Each shipment brought in valuable foreign exchange, strengthening the currency and reducing reliance on foreign loans. Even duck feathers became treasure. Once discarded, they were now transformed in textile workshops into pillows, mattresses, and winter jackets for export. What was once waste became the foundation of a new industry. Burkina Faso was no longer just selling ducks. It was building a complete value chain, from food security at home to industrial exports abroad. And the benefits reached even further. As ducks fed on locusts and insects, they naturally reduced crop infestations, protecting traditional farming in the process. What began as the release of birds became something far greater, a national movement, an economic engine, and a new symbol of independence. Farmers who had once watched entire harvests vanish to pests now saw their fields protected. Duck manure, rich in nutrients, was collected and sold as organic fertilizer, restoring soils long damaged by overuse and desertification. Ducks also created unexpected bridges between farming and livestock. Eggs that weren't sold were boiled and added to poultry feed, while byproducts from processing plants became supplements for cattle and goats. Bit by bit, ducks were lifting the entire agricultural economy. But perhaps the greatest change came for women. For generations, women had been sidelined from large-scale farming. Yet in the duck industry, they found their place at the center. They gathered eggs, ran cooperatives, and managed sales in local markets. For many, this was the first time they held direct, independent income in their hands. President Traoré anticipated this shift and launched special training programs for women's groups. The results were powerful. Women reinvested their earnings into schools, healthcare, and family nutrition. Poverty rates fell fastest in households where women thrived in the duck trade. And soon, ducks were no longer just about food or trade, they became a national identity. Songs, proverbs, and radio shows celebrated ducks as symbols of resilience. Children grew up on stories of how Burkina Faso had turned a humble bird into a revolution. Foreign leaders visiting the country were served banquets featuring duck delicacies. International journalists who once mocked the idea began praising Traoré as a food visionary. For ordinary citizens, from farmers to street vendors, it became a shared success story. But beneath the pride was a deeper political message. Africa did not need to copy Western models or wait for foreign aid. It could build prosperity from its own ecosystems, its own creativity, and its own leaders. Ducks were just the beginning. As Traoré declared, we do not measure wealth by gold or oil alone. We measure it by the ability of every family to eat, to work, and to live with dignity. Our ducks have taught us that solutions can be simple, cheap, and revolutionary. What began as a bold release of 5 million ducks grew into something far greater. It reshaped the land itself. For decades, Burkina Faso battled drought, desertification, and soil erosion that drove villages from their homes. Yet with the ducks came a new balance. Acting as natural pest controllers, they reduced the need for toxic chemicals that had poisoned the earth. Locust swarms that once devoured fields were intercepted by flocks of ducks, saving millions in potential crop losses. Their presence also stabilized water ecosystems. Ducks kept algae under control, fertilized ponds with nutrients, and even helped fish populations rebound. Children in remote villages who had never tasted fish now enjoyed it alongside duck meat and eggs. Farmers saw their soils grow darker and richer, holding water longer through dry seasons, a small miracle in a land once turning to dust. By the third year, scientists reported measurable improvements in soil fertility where ducks had settled. Grasslands returned. Trees planted near wetlands flourished. The Great Green Wall Project, Africa's fight against the advancing Sahara, gained an unexpected ally: millions of ducks quietly maintaining ecosystems without machines or chemicals. Most importantly, the Duck Project sparked grassroots environmental stewardship. Villages began protecting rivers and wetlands, passing their own local laws against overfishing or pollution. For the first time, conservation wasn't imposed by foreign NGOs but born from within communities themselves. Traoré's genius was simple. By giving ducks economic value, he gave citizens a reason to protect their land and water. Conservation had become profitable, and when it pays, it lasts. The ripple effects reached even further. Stronger soils, healthier wetlands, and restored biodiversity made Burkina Faso more resilient against droughts and unpredictable rains. Food security no longer depended on a single harvest. Families had meat, eggs, fish, and fertile fields to rely on. Resilience became the nation's identity. Children grew up seeing ducks not just as animals, but as protectors of their future. Families cherished the transformation in their lives. It wasn't only about food, it was about hope, pride, and the proof that Africa could design its own solutions. The world had once laughed at the idea of releasing 5 million ducks. But history now records it as an act of genius. Ducks changed ecosystems, rewrote economies, inspired a continent, and challenged global powers.